So when you're offering a personalized experience and you're using somebody's data, you are implicitly making a set of promises to them. First and foremost, that you will empower them. But in order to do that, you have to know them. You have to know me in an appropriate way that I feel comfortable about the data you have.
This is Revenue Makers, the podcast by 6 Sense investigating successful revenue strategies that pushed companies ahead.
Simon, do you use Netflix or watch Netflix a lot?
I do. Probably more than I should.
I think Netflix thinks that I'm some sort of like serial killer or serial killer aficionado because I watched like one horror movie and now it just continues to recommend really violent slashing, which I find very disturbing. Anyway, I tangent a little bit, but it's actually kind of a really good intro to our guest today, David Edelman. We're going to talk about personalization and a book that has actually just come out that he's written about that very topic.
Yeah, the book is called Personalized with the AI highlighted, and it is the book on how to drive growth with AI, particularly, given David's career. He's been CMO multiple times. He has been in the agency side. He's worked at BCG and McKinsey, and now teaches at Harvard Business School.
He's doing engagements and working with brands on their personalization strategies, personalization as a business strategy. And that's, of course, one of the things that we hit on is that these aren't just simple tactics, but it's really a way to think about your business and think about business outcomes. And I think in B2B, we talk about personalization. We are still very much behind B2C. And I think so much of it feels very tactical. I know for me, kind of like knocked me on the side of my head to say, think about this in a much more strategic business way than just trying to do something interesting on your website.
Yeah, he's got a great framework. He has boiled it down to 5 steps and 5 promises of AI. And so I think we should just jump right in, Adam.
Let's do it. David, thanks so much for jumping on. Really looking forward to chatting about a bunch of things with you. But before we dive in, I'd love for you to give the folks out there just a little bit about the book and kind of where you're coming from just on the overall idea of personalization, because I think we have an audience that's going to think about it and then you're going to change the way they think about it.
Yeah, sure. So I actually have been in this space since 1989, before the internet, which tells you how old I am. But I was a young consultant then and had 3 clients in a row who were starting to collect customer data and asking what could they do with it. And we helped them develop loyalty program in one case, a whole new advertising targeting capability. And I thought there was something more to it and wrote an article called Segment of One Marketing. 1989.
You were ahead of your time, David.
Yeah. And actually, the article essentially talks about Spotify as one of the examples of things that I predicted would happen. And it was my launch pad for my career, frankly. That article took off. It got a lot of good press, conferences, helped me get clients for BCG. And then, of course, the internet happened and so much caught up. But what interestingly happened along the way was I realized that it was more than just marketing, that it was about personalization even more broadly in terms of customer experiences. And that it was more cross-functional if done right. It really was the core value prop, in essence, almost the product and the whole experience that a brand delivers being based on that. And increasingly, we're seeing now that's how more and more companies are competing. I mean, just think about the things you are drawn to from a brand perspective, whether it's Spotify, Uber, Netflix. A lot of these digital native brands are based on the premise that they're using information about you to create value, ideally doing so in a way that you feel is an appropriate handling of your data. But we're starting to see now, and clients of mine, I do a lot of independent advisory work, are working through, they're not digital natives, and they're figuring out how to take information that they can either just ask customers about or see in their operations and use that to create a fundamentally different experience. So I define personalization as delivering experiences at scale that use information about a customer to bring them value, whether it's to make things easier, faster, cheaper, more joyful, more able to discover new things. And then they improve over time as you get more and more information. So we can go through examples if you want, but that's the way I define it.
No, and I love that you kind of simplified it or synthesized it down to that. Our audience tends to lean much more B2B. B2B marketers often face this challenge where our targets in the real world, in the B2C side of their lives, are getting personalization and curated journeys and, one segment of one marketing. I think the B2C side has been ahead of that curve for much longer than B2B has. But of course, technology, MarTech, AI are all helping kind of bridge that. And so you wrote a book. I was lucky enough to be in the audience when you presented. I think it was the day you finally got that first hardcover version, and you talked about the 5 tenets you have around personalization. I'd love for you to walk through them one by one, please.
Yeah, sure. And then I'll use a good example to wrap them all together, which is a B2B example, because I think we need to bring it to life. So when you're offering a personalized experience and you're using somebody's data, you are implicitly making a set of promises to them. First and foremost, that you will empower them, that you will enable them to do something they couldn't do before because of the way you are activating information about them. But in order to do that, you have to know them. You have to know me in an appropriate way that I feel comfortable about the data you have. So maybe you asked me questions and I answered them. A financial service company create a plan. Okay, you have that plan. Let's use that plan. Or I'm doing things with you that I expect you to know and I don't want to have to tell you again. Then once you have that knowledge of me, then reach me appropriately. Don't bombard me. And that's a huge risk with all the AI capabilities. We can create all this content and every division of a company can all bombard the same customers. Think about less is more, because we're actually seeing people unsubscribing at higher rates. Open rates on emails are going down because people are being bombarded. So how do you reach somebody in a more orchestrated manner? Then once you reach them, show them. Give them something that they can actually see why it's appropriate for them. A visual, usually some kind of visual experience. I'll give you an example in a moment. And then over time, delight me. Make it better as you learn more and more about me. So it's empower me, know me, reach me, show me, delight me. So let me give you a good example. Cisco, not the technology company, the food delivery company. They serve thousands of restaurants across the country. And whenever anyone who's a purchasing manager from that restaurant, from a restaurant, opens the Cisco app, in 300 milliseconds, that app knows who you are, your restaurant, your menu, your price points, your consumption rate on the things that you've been buying, whether you tend to buy in bulk or on a spot basis. And then they also know for the warehouse near you what they have in stock and what maybe they want to move because it's food. And so they got to get it out the door. So they might offer a special or a new menu item that fits your restaurant that you should consider that they'll have a discount on. So we've talked to the people who actually use this app, and it's great because it simplifies dramatically their ability to order. They feel confident that they're getting good prices, and they're learning about new things that they could sell in the restaurant. So let's go back to the 5 promises, everything coming together there. You are empowering those restaurant buyers to dramatically simplify the way they order food, to discover new things and find discounts. You know them from their interactions with you in an appropriate way that those buyers would expect you to. Instead of bombarding the customer reaching out, you're there in 300 milliseconds when they open up that app. You're right there with what they need. And then you're showing them in a personalized way options that fit who they are. And then as they order and you see what they buy, it gets smarter and smarter and sharper in its recommendations. So all of those fit together in an extremely personalized experience. So that's what we're talking about, making that all fit together.
When I think about personalization in the past and my own work with it and teams and so forth, like it has very much felt more tactical than strategic, where it's like, I'm going to do this. So I'm going to personalize this. And then as you're talking through those 5 points there, it's like, there was nothing in it for the folks that we were delivering that to. Like I could think about things literally that we're doing that I'm like, hey, we want to do this because it's going to help us. Maybe conversion's going to go up or something like that. So it's really changing your mindset. Can you talk a little bit about like that whole sort of like personalization as a strategy across the business more so than being tactical?
Yeah, sure. So it's clear that if you're going to do the kinds of experiences that I'm talking about that are dramatically more impactful because it defines how somebody thinks about your brand, it is inherently cross-functional. It takes a lot of different functions working together to make that happen. And therefore, it's something in the executive team you have to be aligned against. It's not just something marketing can do. The example I just talked about with Cisco, so that's marketing, you got e-commerce sales, you've got the warehouses and the supply chain involved, you've got finance because you're talking about pricing deals and promotions, all working together to figure out how that thing should operate. IT is involved, so all of those are going to be involved. So it's a mindset that says customer first. Maybe the reality is core products we sell, maybe those are actually commoditizing and more competitive. And so we have to compete based on the experience around it and making it easier to learn, buy, get, use, pay, get support for. All of those kinds of functions, that's how we got to compete. And that's going to make a difference. And as we learn more about what customers like and we get more data, we create more advantage because we're learning more and we're getting smarter. So it is a mindset change. It's not about just tactically, okay, now Gen AI says I can create 10 different versions of this 5% off thing, and I can figure out who to send the different 5% to. You can do that. Okay, that's fine. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but you don't need a book to figure out how to do that. And if you do it too much, it's going to backfire and you're going to start getting people unsubscribing and just thinking that you're spam.
And I love the way you're framing it because we work at Sixth Sense. Sixth Sense exists for this, personalization and giving a unique, customized experience at scale. In the world of AI, which is the new reality, just because you can, I guess, doesn't mean you should. And we had our customer conference just about 2 weeks ago, and I stood up on that main stage and said, context is really what's king now in this new age of AI, because the root of AI is the same large language models, the same sort of, ability to create, replicate, scale. But it really is the contextual knowledge of where that company might be in their journey, what their pain points are, what they care about, that will allow you to harness this power of AI to craft a much more unique experience for them and be that competitive advantage that you're speaking about. When people do think you can't really be personalizing unless it's one-to-one, unless it's 1 to 50 accounts or 20 accounts, this personalization at scale, I know you gave an example, but what are you seeing kind of as additional use cases where AI is facilitating that, but in the right way?
One thing I just want to point out, Saima, that what you're talking about is also expanded across different kinds of AI. So the generative AI can generate content, but there's also AI that's been around for a while, machine learning, predictive modeling. I mean, now, yes, the capabilities are sharper, but to figure out who is the right person, when to reach out, that's not generative AI. That's machine learning. It's been around, those models, Google, Facebook. I mean, this has been around for a while. And building up your data and muscles and doing that has been a part of this game. The thing is, now you can create content to go along with it. But even those earlier models of AI, people haven't really thought through how to use it to manage in an appropriate way. So I'm now going to give you the other Cisco, the technology company, a different example where it's not just one-to-one, but you are thinking about things on a personalized basis. So salespeople from Cisco have like over 100 products to peddle. There's a lot that this company sells. Many of them have lots of different customers. And how do they figure out what to talk to whom about when? Most of the time, what they had been doing was taking new product announcements and sending those on to their customers in the hope that that might ignite a conversation. But any given product at a given time is not going to be relevant to the vast, vast majority. And so customers were starting to tune out and they were finding it harder to get meetings. And so they had to step back and rethink it. So they created CRM on steroids. And they had a new leader, her name was Jerry Elliott, who brought together marketing and sales in one organization. So that's another piece of this. And they said, okay, let's look at, from a customer perspective, data about how are they using our products? Who's using the products? Is it trending up or down? What marketing materials have they responded to in the past? Externally, are there public announcements about the company? New products, expansion, contraction, acquisitions, and a whole bunch of information all brought together. A number of different AI tools making that happen. A lot of it having to do with AI that writes code that enables you to integrate data. So Gen AI can write the code to do that. So they're integrating the data, then they're using machine language to figure out what is the right time when there's a trigger to act on, and then what is the next best content to send. And then that helps a salesperson get a weekly call list of who to call, about what, and why, all on one pane of glass. And then as they touch their customers, it records what happens and it learns. So their sales call rate has gone up. People want to talk to them. Customer satisfaction is higher. Salesforce turnover is lower. And that's not necessarily one-to-one. It's not custom, but it is about the right message at the right time through the right channel.
That's a really great example too of just scale driving like real business outcomes, right? I'm sure they've got all sorts of data on those specifics there too. Obviously, all this is about data. And one of the things you talk about in the book is building that personalization engine. And it was sort of like an actionable tip, but it's a big, hairy, scary process. But like to begin that process in an organization, right? Because you need so much data. How, if I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to make a strategic decision to start to implement the strategy, but I've got very little, or at least I think I have very little. I probably have more data than I realize, but how do I start putting together the building blocks of that engine?
It's very dangerous to say I'm going to start just gathering my data and figuring out what data I can get, because there's so much and you could spin your wheels and spend a hell of a lot on technology. So generally, when we've looked at companies who have been more successful, they start with saying, what do we want to accomplish? What's the end business goal? What is the experience we want to deliver to customers? How do we want to drive the business? And then take that experience and say, what information do I need to figure out who and what to have to set up the contact? What information are we going to exchange in the contact? What are we going to learn after the contact that makes us better? And focus on the interaction, and then focus on the data you need for that. With all the AI tools out there, including especially stuff that you guys offer, the capabilities are out there. But the question is where to point them, to focus, to say how you want to get business value out of it, because otherwise you're just buying tools and your finance people are saying, where the heck's the impact? So focusing on use cases that are going to derive value and then working through the data below that. And so it's about general business people working together with IT, where overall the leadership team is saying, yeah, data is a blood flow for our operations, but we can't do everything at once. So let's really focus on unlocking the pieces we need to make something happen. And then odds are especially if you're a mid-sized to larger company, you probably have a lot of tools that you're just not using adequately. And the question is focus.
David, you've had a really interesting career path. You've been CMO for many companies. You've spent a lot of time on the agency side. You now teach at Harvard. And so much is changing in the industry in the last year alone. Sometimes it seems really hard to even stay on top of all of that. What would you say doesn't change, though? What would you say is really core, regardless of whether you're in this AI world or you're not? What are those key factors that you still need to be on top of?
It's a great question. And it's interesting because in the faculty at Harvard Business School, this is a real important discussion because there's so much pressure to add in all this stuff on digital and AI. And that's important. There's no question. But people still need to understand the basics of marketing strategy, the concept of segmentation, the concept of positioning and brand, how brands create value. There's just fundamentals about marketing strategy that no matter what the capabilities are, you need to guide you to set your priorities, to figure out what you want the things to do and accomplish, how you're going to compete. So being able to do something like a very simple 4 C's analysis. So who are my customers? Who are my competitors? What are my channels? What are my company's own assets? And saying, given that landscape, how are we going to position ourselves and compete? How do we think about the segmentation possibilities? Who should be our targets? Now, AI can help in that. There's no question to provide more data and faster analysis, but you have to know how to think, how to ask the right questions and set those North Stars. Otherwise, you're just all over the place. So, yes, I think a lot changes, but marketing still requires that strategic sense.
Nail the fundamentals before I start talking about technology and all that. So I'm going to ask Simon a question. It's going to be about measurement. So you talked about Cisco, the food company, and all the data points that the folks would have when they opened the app. We talked about Cisco, the tech company, even named sort of specific things that were increases and sort of how it was impacting sales productivity and so forth. But when you think about measurement as a whole, when you said think about the business outcome, so you want to measure the business outcome, but how do you think about building your measurement strategy for all of this?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the middle of this with a couple of clients right now who are embarking on this, and they're saying, okay, we want to see whether our pilots are successful. What defines success? How do we know what we should scale, for example? So, first and foremost, what you're doing should be driving towards business impact of some kind, but it is going to vary and it's not universal. It may be more specific sales, but how are you even defining that? Is it growing your customer base? Is it more cross sell? Is it more share of wallet? Is it, lowering attrition? You got to think about that. For some companies, it's about just simply getting more product usage because as people use it, they get more value and that eventually leads to retention or maybe higher pricing. And, I worked at a healthcare company. I was at Aetna. And one of the things we wanted to do was to get people to take healthier actions because, first of all, they get healthier, but then their medical costs go down. And that's good for them and it's good for us. So there's metrics that we looked at are people taking those health actions. And when you look at the people who did those health actions, did it lead to better health outcomes and lower medical costs? So I think it really varies. But one of the important things is having baselines. And this is where I think a lot of people fall short because as soon as you start going after something, you have to know your starting point so you can see whether you're getting better or not. And sometimes that in and of itself, before you get to the AI and all of that, requires some data engineering to actually be able to measure how much are people actually using our products? Or in the case of Aetna, are people taking the behaviors? How do we get the data on them taking that behaviors? Well, turns out for a company like Aetna, you can get claims data because you can see whether someone did that and get the claims. But you have to think about very deliberately, the measurement in and of itself has a data. And Adam, you're asking a lot about data, but there is a data strategy for measurement that in many cases may come before the AI even, just to get your starting point.
Yeah. And you need that right mix of leading and lagging indicators to be able to even quantify something like what I think is probably the most important promise of personalization, which is the delight me, right? And
Mhm.
create that joy. Like the long-term implications, especially in a SaaS world of retention and expansion and, NRR and GRR, that's a really hard one to quantify. And it takes almost longer to actually show the impact over time.
Yeah. So, your leading indicators would be things like product usage. Are people actually using the product? Are they expanding the range of features that they're using? Frequency of use, all of those things would be, in your case, leading indicators.
David, we have a question we like to ask every guest. Given your varied experiences over the years, what is the most ridiculous thing you've been asked to do in your career?
Okay. I have one, which is do an interview on a Ferris wheel. I was at a conference on creativity in Montreal that was in this big exhibition hall. And for some reason, they had a Ferris wheel right outside. And the whole thing was getting people to do interviews on this rather rickety Ferris wheel. So as you're being interviewed, you're wondering why this thing is making all of these noises and you're feeling uncomfortable, but you have to keep clarity of mind while you're answering questions. So I think that was one of the more ridiculous situations I was in business wise.
You know what? I'm inspired. I think we're going to do the podcast from a Ferris wheel from now on.
No, we're not, Adam.
Yeah, I
No,
think
we're
it's a
not.
great idea. No, okay. Well, David, this was great. Really, I mean, I'm just thinking about just stuff around here that we do and personalization, thinking about how we can reapproach things. So really thought provoking. And I know the audience is going to get a lot of that. So really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Terrific talking with you guys.
You've been listening to Revenue Makers.
Do you have a revenue project you were asked to execute that had wild success? Share your story with us at sixthsense.com/revenue, and we might just ask you to come on the show. And if you don't want to miss the next episode, be sure to follow along on your favorite podcast app.